For some context, this actually happened about a few years ago before I moved out of town. It was Halloween sometime, I believe, in 2018. My friends and I were going trick or treating near an area that we've been known about. It was not far from my friend's house, so it wasn't really a big deal. We started trick or treating, and we all of a sudden came across this one house that was really beautifully decorated. There were costumes, and there were even pumpkins, and there were even some nice, cool decorations that look almost real. However, this one house, however, had a really weird dude. I honestly can't point my finger on what it was, but this dude looked like he'd been at most in the house for at least a few years. He looked like he might have been maybe in his early 60s, and I went up with my friends and we said, "Trick or treat." As soon as he gave us the candy, he ended up telling us something. Oh, okay. That was kind of weird. I thought that maybe this guy might have been maybe having issues or something, so I brushed it off with my friends. However, though, when we got out, or close to the end of the driveway out of that house, I smelled something odd. Imagine rotting flesh in a garbage can. That's exactly what I smelled. My friend and I were honestly confused, so we waited for the man to turn off his lights. As soon as he did that, indicating he was out of candy, and we saw no more lights being active on the first floor, we headed over towards the trash can that was at the end of his driveway. We looked inside, and we honestly saw what seemed to be a body in there. The body looked like it might have been a cat. It looked like it could have been a calico, and it looks like its neck had been snapped, blood, and there was some cuts on the skin and that. We nearly vomited and went over back to my friend's house and we called the police at the property. And honestly, the police arrived within a few minutes. They arrested the man, and it turns out this man had actually killed his own cat. I can't really remember what his name was, but I think his name was William or something. He had been wanted on a list for killing animals, but he had been put on probation, and he had also been banned from ever owning an animal. The police investigated one of the places, and they ended up finding out that there was some animals, some cats that had been either giving lack of food and water. Some of them were abused in a really messed up, violent way. It was just really horrible. The man was sent to prison for a long time, and this is the one Halloween that I will never forget. For a bit of context, this actually happened sometime in 2016 to a worker who happened to be a student who was working there when she was about 16 years old. Her name was Mary Beth, and she had been deciding to get a part-time job there. It's a seasonal Halloween store, and since she was in high school, she really wanted something, but since her parents couldn't afford it, she ended up getting a part-time job at a local Spirit Halloween store. You know, it's Spirit. It's pretty much a popular place where Halloween costumes and that are being sold there. Mary Beth lurked around the closing shift, which was one that she dreaded, but it was better than nothing. While she was there, she ended up looking over to see that there was one there. It was someone she didn't even notice, and at first she thought that maybe they were just coming for a Halloween costume. Of course, it was on Halloween, which she had to end up working, because on Halloween it was the closing night, which of course she didn't want to work on Halloween. She asked the man what he wanted. He said, that's alright. I don't need anything. He said. This honestly was getting Mary Beth really weirded out. She had no idea what this man was doing or why he was there. He was just looking at all the stuff, and he was just staring at her every few seconds. Mary Beth started to get a little bit more uncomfortable. Why was this guy even there if he wasn't going to buy anything? This honestly really got really weird. So, at this point, they ended up just looking over at each other. At that point, Mary Beth just continued to work on her own thing when all of a sudden she looked up to see that this man had been following her almost everywhere in the store. She tried to lose him in many ways, but this guy was like at least a few feet behind him. When she got out and towards her car, she saw the man charging at her with full force. She was lucky that she had her pocket knife and stabbed the guy right in the thigh, causing him to scream out in pain. She ended up kicking him hard and going to her car and then driving over to the nearest police station. One of the other workers saw her left, so when they closed up the shop, they ended up going over and asking her what was going on. Mary Beth said that this man tried to attack her, and they ended up calling the cops, but by the time they got to the front entrance of the Halloween Spirit store, the man was already gone. There was no trace of him, but Mary Beth knew that she shouldn't be alone, so she ended up getting the not closing shifts, but of course that was only going to be for at least one more week, as they were only open for the last week. Still though, she had no idea what this man had planned, and she honestly didn't want to find out. She ended up getting really terrified by this moment that made her think twice about working night shifts. After working at the Halloween store, she ended up not ever working at the late closing shifts at Spirit again. This was the only issue where she had problems, but that was just it. She had never seen that man again, and still wonders today was this man really trying to kidnap her, steal her stuff? Anything was possible. But unfortunately, that was a question that she still will have no idea to this very day. For a bit of context, one of my friends who happened to be out of high school and was in college went to this one Halloween party. Her name was Laura, and she was about 19 when this happened, back in 2016. Laura was going to this one Halloween party by her college students, was at a pretty big party house. It was neatly decorated and that, so she ended up going with her girlfriend, who happened to be Samantha, who was at least a year older than Laura. Laura and Samantha had been good friends since high school, and to which they got along just fine. They go to this one Halloween party, and they see a bunch of friends from college, and including some of the guy friends that they hang out with. They were all having fun, drinking, doing their usual thing, all that. As they were chatting and just dressing up in costumes, Laura was a black cat, when meanwhile Samantha was dressed up as Daphne Blake from Scooby-Doo. They were chatting, drinking, and having a great time when all of a sudden Laura started drinking a lot more than she normally would. However, she ended up leaving her drink at a counter and asked Samantha to watch her drink, to which Samantha was nowhere to be seen. So the woman, who she assumed was Samantha, who kind of looked resembling to Daphne a little bit, maybe because Scooby-Doo was popular at that party, to ask her to watch over the drink, so she went over to use the bathroom. By the time Laura got back, she drank the rest of her drink, and then within a few minutes, she started feeling disoriented. She felt like something was weighing down on her head. She then collapsed onto the floor, to which a few people ended up taking notice. Laura was out like a light, and people started panicking around her. Laura woke up in a bedroom at least a few hours later. It was probably around 1 in the morning. She was in their apartment near the campus apartment she was at. She ended up getting up and asked what was going on. Her friend Samantha said that her drink had been spiked by someone at the party, which caused her to fall down. The most disturbing part is what Samantha explained next. A woman who happened to spike her drink ended up going on a rampage and started shooting people. Only 2 students were injured, but unfortunately one of them ended up killed during that little massacre. It honestly scared Laura, but Laura was just glad that she wasn't the one killed or anything. She does feel bad for the people that got hurt and for one of the parents that lost their kids in that little fight scene. The person who did start the shooting up massacre in that party, yeah, she ended up arrested, but however, she was mentally unstable and had a lot of problems, to which is why she did the thing she did. Apparently no one at the college recognized her, as this woman looked like she was in her early 40s. That was all the information they had been given. But this is why Laura will not be going to college parties like this again. Ever since that incident, she's been staying away from Halloween parties ever since. So this happened to a teacher of mine who used to be an elementary school teacher. It happened on Halloween of 2011. I'm going to keep this as short as I can because mainly he doesn't remember much about this. He was home alone that night as his wife had happened to take 2 of his kids trick-or-treating. The teacher, who was an elementary student's name was Mr. Wilson. He ended up hearing what seemed to be a knock at the door, and it happened to be just shortly after his wife and kids left. He went to open the door to see a woman. She looked ghostly pale, and she ended up saying the lines of, "Trick or treat." This was obviously odd, but seeing that she had no candy bag, he ended up giving the candy to her and she took off. However, within the second he closed the door, she knocked again a few minutes later. He ended up giving her most of the candy, saying, "Can I have more?" over and over again. It got to the point where Mark didn't even answer the door. He ended up going back to watching his TV show, and the woman never contacted him again. It was just really a weird night, but he never told anyone about this because he was just as confused as he was during that time.